What up, YouTube? Since it's October, I figured we'd do some horror stories, and I've got a really good one for you from my days as a mechanic. Stay tuned. Alright, the visuals on this video might be somewhat boring, but I promise that the story is not. I had an issue with an appointment a while back, and it was to the point where I actually thought there was a slight possibility that the customer might try to come after me and sue me or whatever the case may be. And so, just in case, I went ahead and I wrote down, this was like right after, too, like the day after, if that, I decided to make a Google document and it accounts all of the events that took place. So I wouldn't have to remember this if anything ever came up from it. So I apologize in advance if the visuals are kind of boring, because I'm basically just going to be reading a Word document as far as what actually happened. But I promise that the story is interesting and it will be worth your time to listen. So I also want to start out by saying that I am going to leave the customer's name out of this just to protect people's privacy. My business name, appointment, I put the customer name, the date. It was a 2000 Subaru Outback 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, and the job was a timing belt and water pump kit, and I was charging labor only $405. I don't remember what the labor time was on this particular job. So, when we do labor only, at least for me, that generally means that the customer's providing their own parts. So I do want to preface it with that. Okay, mechanic Andrew, account of the events that occurred during this appointment. Andrew, appointment was scheduled for Monday, 10/9/23 at noon. Agreement was for timing belt water pump kit replacement. Customer states water pump is leaking. I arrived on time to the appointment and greeted the customer. I tried to start the vehicle and noticed the battery was dead. So there's our first red flag. We got a dead battery on a vehicle that we're supposed to do a timing belt on. Come on now. So anyway, I checked the battery voltage with a multimeter, and the battery was at less than 1 volt state of charge. I used my jumper cables and my van to start the vehicle to confirm that it would start and run before doing the job. Excellent tip right there, guys. If you're going to be doing a timing belt job, and you're a mobile mechanic especially, you want to make sure that that engine starts up and runs, if you can, of course. Now, if it doesn't run, it's broken, you know it's broken, then that's a different story. But if they're just doing it based on maintenance purposes or mileage, I strongly recommend that you start that engine and make sure that it starts and runs before you get started on the job. That way, they can't blame you for anything later, and you know that this is, solid. Because if it's not running good and you go ahead and do the timing belt without starting it up, then you might end up with some problems that they try to blame you for. So anyway, the engine started and ran normally with no noticeable issues. So we're good. We're ready to do the timing belt. I turned the engine off and asked the customer if they had any water I could pour into the system to confirm the water pump was leaking. After a sufficient amount of water was added to the radiator, it was clear that the water pump was leaking. The engine did not need to be started, and a pressure test did not need to be performed to get the leak to occur. It just started pouring out of the water pump. After confirming the water pump leak and that the engine did not seem to make any abnormal noises, as well as had the ability to start and run, I proceeded to get started on the repair. The customer only provided the water pump and timing belt. Second issue here, they did not provide the full kit. I proceeded to get started with the repair. Customer only provided water pump timing belt. I expressed to the customer that for liability purposes, I would need to replace the entire timing belt kit, which includes the needed idler pulleys and belt tensioner, in addition to the timing belt and water pump. This engine is an interference engine, meaning if the timing is not correct, the engine will essentially get destroyed. Pistons will hit valves and cause major engine damage if these pulleys fail, tensioner fails, or the belt fails. This is why I insisted on getting the full kit. The customer went to get the full kit from the auto parts store, and I got started on the job. I probably should have waited till he came back, but I'm not here to make money, and if I'm standing around, I'm not making money, so I did go ahead and get started on the job. I got everything removed around the time the customer returned with the timing belt kit. This kit was a Dayco kit, although I do not recall the part number. I opened the kit and noticed that the water pump gasket was of poor quality material, probably a paper gasket, which I do not trust at all. I normally carry Permatex, the Right Stuff, gray RTV gasket maker on me, but I was out at the time. I offered to go and purchase some at no charge to the customer to ensure a proper seal on the water pump. So I wanted to make sure we had a good gasket. I trust the RTV better than the paper gasket that they gave me. And since I normally carry that, I was willing to go ahead and get that at no charge to the customer. Although it was not without inconvenience to me. I had to drive to 2 different auto parts stores near the customer's location to find what I needed. That means the first place didn't have it. I returned to the job, and then I got the water pump installed with the RTV gasket maker. I then went to bolt up the timing belt tensioner. I got the bolt threaded in all the way by hand. I went to tighten the bolt with my ratchet, and it got loose again. So that's our third issue. I then unscrewed the bolt, and all of the aluminum threads came out with the hole, or all of the aluminum threads came out with the bolt, and this hole was now destroyed. I then went to the auto parts store nearest to the customer to look for a helicoil thread insert kit, which the customer agreed to pay for half of, $35. This raised the total bill to $440. The first auto parts store did not seem to have ever heard of the part I was looking for. I then went back to where I live, the next town over, where I normally get my parts, and acquired the helicoil kit from them for $70. I returned to the customer's location, determined that the helicoil was too large and would not work. Unfortunately, I did not have a way to measure the threads, plus the threads were all pulled out, so there's literally no way I could really measure it with a thread tool anyway. Found out the helicoil was too large, wouldn't work. Customer offered me to go home and de-stress and give it another shot tomorrow, which I accepted. So far the customer was still relatively cool up to this point. Over that evening, I determined that this damaged hole can be repaired by replacing the bracket the hole is located on. I later found out that this is actually a common issue with Subaru engines, which actually it wasn't the same bracket. It was like an alternator bracket or something like that. But I've had this issue happen on another Subaru vehicle as well, just on a different bracket. I read in a forum online this is actually a common issue on these engines, and there did not seem to be any shortage of this bracket in stock. The next day, I returned the helicoil to the auto parts store and purchased a new bracket from the Lee Summit Subaru dealership for roughly the same price as the helicoil kit, which the customer agreed to pay for half of. I returned to the customer's original location and immediately realized that the new bracket was slightly different than the original, so another issue here. But it would still work properly if I were able to get some longer bolts to put it on. I think the bracket was like thicker or something like that, but it's still lined up right, if I remember right. So I needed to go get some bolts, went to the nearest auto parts store, purchased 2 longer bolts to mount the bracket, once again at no additional cost to the customer. Just wanted to get it over with, help them out, do whatever I could to move things forward. Then proceeded to install the new timing belt. I got all the marks lined up properly, but could not get the belt to fully fit on. After consulting with multiple different sources of service information for this job, I determined I was attempting to install the belt correctly, and therefore there must be a part issue. It took me over 2 hours of struggling with this belt before I came to the conclusion that the belt must be wrong or have a slight factory defect. I requested one more evening to go home and unwind from this job. At this point, it had become very stressful. The next morning, Wednesday, on the final day of the job, I returned to the customer's location first. I then matched up the old belt to the new belt. I then put the old belt back on the engine and determined that it would fit. This confirmed that the new belt was incorrect and that I was doing my repair procedure properly. The old belt was a Napa brand belt. I then spoke to the customer about going to go get some other belt options that would fit, and the customer agreed that would be the best way to move forward. I then went to the Napa Auto Parts store that was closest to the customer and got that belt. Then I went back to the Subaru dealership and purchased an OEM timing belt from them for $165. Napa belt was $90. I returned to the customer location and gave them the options that they could either purchase the Subaru belt for a $165 increase or the Napa belt for a $90 increase. I was going to sell these parts to the customer at cost just to help them out. So one other thing I've done to help out the customer that is absolutely of no benefit to me. The customer went inside and spoke to his wife, came back out and told me they cannot take another $100 hit right now and to go and put the old belt back on. So after I drove all around all day getting these belts, now they're telling me that they can't take another $100 hit. And it's like, well, how much did you think the timing belt was going to cost? Like, you should have told me that you can't spend any more money before we even, went to go get these belts. So anyway, at this point I was pretty much over it. I then proceeded to install the old belt with no issues, got the car put back together. When I was about 10 minutes away from being finished up, the customer got under the vehicle and started doing his own oil change. I don't even know what issue we're up to. This is like 5, 6, 7 now at this point. Customer just didn't even say nothing, just got up under the car, started doing their own oil change. Customer replaced engine oil filter and drained the oil. During the time that I was filling the coolant, my phone cut off. Customer filled the coolant at the same time that I filled the oil. I cannot speak to the quality or the type of oil that the customer used, nor can I verify the amount that was added. Once everything was put back together, I began to fill the cooling system back up with coolant that was provided at no charge to the customer, as the customer did not provide coolant and told me he was just going to put water in it. So there's another thing I did for the customer at a huge inconvenience to myself. To avoid any potential issues with this repair, I opted to provide coolant at no cost to the customer. Once the cooling system was filled, I put my jumper cables back on and the customer attempted to start the vehicle. The vehicle hesitated to start and pressure was coming out of the radiator cap while it was on. This gave me the indication that a potential head gasket failure was going on with this vehicle. Real quick, this is the last page, guys. I promise we're getting to the end of it here. Vehicle finally got started after a few attempts. The engine ran fine and ran just the same as it did before I started the job. The customer agreed to pay. After several card declines with their first card, they then used a second card to pay $200 and a third card to pay $190 to finish off the balance. During this time, the vehicle was still running to charge up the battery. We all noticed that white smoke was coming from the Subaru exhaust. This indicates that the engine is burning coolant. I then explained to the customer that I think they may have a head gasket issue, and I proceeded to leave right after the vehicle was shut off by the customer. I got a few blocks away from the customer's location, and I received a text from them that the Subaru would not start back up. I did not respond immediately as I was stressed out by the situation. I then returned to the Napa store to return the unused new timing belt. I then went back to the Subaru dealer to return the other timing belt and drove home. I then responded to the customer that the Subaru may not be starting because the battery was very low on charge and has been and being charged up would likely help. I also expressed once again that the vehicle likely had a bad head gasket and would need to have that issue checked out, as that is another potential reason why the car will not start. The customer then replied that the car started and ran with no issues every other time, other than the leaky water pump before I worked on it. It seems as if this customer was trying to blame me for issues the vehicle was having. Therefore, I chose not to respond in order to avoid an argument. I cannot provide any warranty on customer-provided parts. I also cannot provide any warranty on a timing belt job where the old timing belt was reinstalled. I believe that this vehicle had a head gasket failure. This caused the engine to burn coolant until it ran low and overheated. After this, someone likely added water to the cooling system, which may have masked the white smoke from the exhaust. The vehicle then ran out of water again due to head gasket leak and overheated again. Through multiple times of overheating, the water pump then failed and began to leak. I could not have foreseen the head gasket issue without doing a full diagnostic on the vehicle prior to doing any work, which the customer did not request nor pay for. I believe that the job I did was a repair for an issue that occurred as a result of a larger issue that this vehicle already had prior to me working on it. This vehicle had roughly 230,000 miles. Based on my knowledge of Subaru, they are also known for and prone to having failed head gaskets. And that is the end of my story. I'm not going to ramble on too much more. Please like, comment, subscribe. Just want to throw that out there. That was sort of a shitty experience that I had to deal with once as a mobile mechanic. And maybe you guys have some horror stories too that you want to share. But that was definitely one of the worst experiences that I have ever had as a mobile mechanic or as a mechanic in general. So anyway, I look forward to reading your comments, and I will see you next time.